And we're back with another episode of Inside Sports Fantasy Football. It's Gerald Glassford coming right back at you here from Inside Sports Fantasy Football, the Lakers Fast Break, Pop Culture Cosmos, and Game Source. We truly appreciate everyone out there listening to all of great shows. And if you can, please give us that 5-star review wherever you give us your podcasts or wherever you listen to them as well. Plus, if you can like, share, subscribe, follow, or do whatever it is that you can to support us right here at the Lakers Fast Break, Game Source, Pop Culture Cosmos, and of course, right here at Inside Sports Fantasy Football, plus the great folks at the Dom-ination Sports Nation. Check out their great podcasts each and every time out, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you, of course, you can support all of that, plus everything that we do covering the world of fantasy football, it is sincerely appreciated. Well, it's getting closer and closer. The time is almost here. The fantasy football playoffs in most leagues will be happening just around the corner. And of course, we here at IS Fantasy Football want to go ahead and talk to you about what's going on with the latest news and information. Some major things are still going down. We just got finished the first game of this week's slate with the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen upending the New England Patriots 27-10. Josh Allen had a little bit of an understated day, 2 touchdowns passing, but he did fumble, so it actually hurt his average, a little bit under his average as far as points are concerned. Devin Singletary on the Buffalo side, as far as running backs are concerned, had a score. Nobody really on the New England Patriots, but if you had the Buffalo Bills defense, that might have worked out for you as well. But that's the start as far as the games going on, the 24-10 victory for the Buffalo Bills. But here today to talk about what's going on with the major news and information that you need to know about in the world of fantasy football. Good man indeed, along with his awesome son, the combination, the duo that they make, they're on each and every time out at the Dom-ination Sports Nation. It is Chris Lardieri, and Chris riding high with the Giants hat, still doing well. There you go, proudly representing. Everything's
Yeah.
all good, but a good season so
Yeah.
far.
Been good. I think afraid they're in a bit of a tailspin here. So hopefully wearing the blue brings out some good karma for the Giants on Sunday against the Commanders. It's looking like a must-win game here in this very competitive NFC East.
I don't blame you a bit. And I know with all the stuff that's going on right now in the league, one of the things I did want to mention first off is a comment that was made by someone who I've had previously in several leagues in the past. I don't this year, but the guy behind us, Aaron Rodgers, who, of course, was very stubborn and reluctant to do anything for the prospective youngster who was drafted to be the heir apparent, loved the quarterback. He always said, I would never help him. I'm not going to help him. I'm the quarterback. I'm not going to do anything to help him out. Well, things have changed. He's not had quite the year that he usually is expecting. Maybe age is starting to set in with Aaron Rodgers, but also the team is doing lousy and they're looking to do some things down the stretch that'll hopefully work out for their future. And one of the things, surprisingly, that he said that might shock some fantasy football owners out there is that he's willing to go ahead and sit on the bench.
What a great humanitarian, huh, Gerald?
Absolutely.
Clearly he's hurt, and/or he sees the writing on the wall and knows his
Yeah.
team isn't going anywhere this year. Not entirely his fault. That's an atrocious defense the Packers have there, but yeah, I find that interesting. If you're an Aaron Jones owner or AJ Dillon owner, does that really affect you? I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I think they both had nice seasons in their own right. Love had some nice passes this past Sunday night against Philadelphia. Is he an every week starter? No, don't need him from a fantasy perspective. But I think at this point in time, the big question is how will he affect your other guys, receivers and running backs you may own from Green Bay?
Absolutely, and that's going to be a big thing. Do you, with Love, do you start to go ahead and put some stock into him? If you're in a keeper league, you might be interested. But for the rest of the season here, is Love maybe even an option for you?
Could be on a matchup week by week basis. I mean, this week, if he does indeed start against the Bears, I would think that'd be slightly favorable, but he hasn't had the reps to kind of warrant a start in fantasy football right now. But what I would do is keep an eye on him, see how he does this Sunday if he is indeed needed the starter.
Well, we'll see how that materializes, but there's still much more to talk about as far as on today's program. Once again, it's Chris Sardieri and Gerald Glassford here with Inside Sports Fantasy Football. If you have any questions on some last minute things that you want to take care of for your team, maybe a pickup or two, or something that you want to talk about as far as lineup changes or things that you want to talk about in regarding fantasy football, go ahead, isfantasyfootball at yahoo.com, plus also as well, of course, Inside Sports FF on Twitter. But talking about this week's matchups, week 13, for fantasy football owners, I know there's still, even with the injuries that have now taken place, there's quite a few across the league. I know there's a lot of players hurting out there, but there's a lot of players gutting it out because there's still, right now, some playoff bursts to be going ahead and be challenged for. Your thoughts on some interesting matchups that you feel will affect fantasy football owners out there?
Yeah, so you look, I'm looking for a competitive edge at this point in time, mismatches wherever you can find them and exploit them. And this might not seem as the most exciting bit of advice, but we've had success in our league streaming defenses every week. And the defense to have this week is Seattle. They're playing the Rams, who are in a complete and utter tailspin. And, I think the Seahawks defense, they got exposed by the Raiders last week, but this is the week you want to own them. And then two, we jettisoned Russell Wilson in one league, and if you haven't done so, I highly encourage that. We went and picked up Trevor Lawrence. I think if he's out there on waivers, that's a quarterback who's starting to show some signs of life. Good to have on your bench. You never know; you may need him in a favorable matchup, and if you make it to the playoffs one of those weeks, and he's going up against Jared Goff, who earlier this year advocated stashing him on your bench. I'm sure people thought I was insane, but he seems to have come around. Amon-Ra St. Brown definitely has benefited. We've got him in two leagues. So that Jaguars Lions matchup could be intriguing, especially if, both those teams on the defensive side of the ball haven't been outstanding this year. The Lions have rebounded, but who knows? Could be one of those shootout type games to keep your eye on. And then, two, I would stay away from Tom Brady if you haven't already. I mean, I know they're up against the Saints, who are really struggling at this point in time, but that's another quarterback we had briefly, got rid of him. I think the Buccaneers are another team that are in somewhat of a tailspin. The sick thing is they may end up winning this division with a sub 500 record. But all in all, there's some really good matchups in the NFL this week. And if you've got Chiefs or Bengals, they're facing each other. I think that should be a great game. And then the Dolphins 49ers game should be intriguing. Can this stout 49ers defense contain Tua and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle? Should be fascinating.
Should be fascinating, but you touched on something that I think is, well, a little bit hard for a lot of fantasy football owners to take, and that's Russell Wilson. As far as actually jettisoning him entirely, he's had an awful season, a season which, again, a lot of people were talking about Denver as a possible Super Bowl contender because he was supposed to be this great acquisition that would get them over the top. It's turned out anything but. But is it really time to go ahead and give up on Russell Wilson?
When you've got a team coached by Nathaniel Hackett that can't cross, what, 17, 18 points. I mean, they only scored 10 against Carolina last week. If you've got a better option at quarterback, and here's hoping you took our advice and had some depth and have a solid backup quarterback, and really, if you need that roster spot, I would release him. I mean, he's done nothing for us for weeks. I would argue, despite the fact that he's changed teams, changed systems, Hackett is just could be one of the biggest failures that a head coach in his first year in NFL history. That doesn't help. Had a lot of injuries at running back. Who knows? There's even talk. He was injured and didn't have surgery either in the year earlier in the year. Maybe that's affecting him. But if you've got a better option, or someone lets a decent quarterback hang out there on the waiver wire, and you've got let's say a Kirk Cousins that you can start week over week, then by all means release him, because I don't see much upside for Wilson. And I think here we're looking at a point in time where if he is indeed still hurt, they may shut him down for the rest of the season, given the amount of money the Broncos are paying him.
That's true. That's true indeed. But once again, it's the Inside Sports Fantasy Football show. It's Gerald Glasser along with Chris Lardieri. Please go ahead and check out Domination Sports Nation wherever you get your podcasts. Speaking of Week 13 in the NFL, I know there's, like you said, some good matchups out there. It is getting closer and closer to the playoff crunch, not only for fantasy football, which gets a little bit sooner, but also as well in the NFL itself. There's a lot of teams that are fighting for playoff berths. You're starting to see those records now matched up with each other as far as the tiebreakers and who will win and who will lose and what happens if this and what happens if that. There's a lot of matchups out there with some teams that are really fighting for some playoff spots at this point in time. Tell me about some of the matchups that are interesting to you this weekend in the NFL.
You look at the Eagles, they're holding on to that number one seed in the NFC. They've got an
Mm.
interesting matchup against the Tennessee Titans. They were trading partners before the season, the big A.J. Brown deal. I think right there, which are the Titans legit contenders? I know they lost to the Bengals. Joe Burrow seems to have their number, but Mike Vrabel's really coached that team up. They played well defensively. I'd like to see if this Eagles team can contain Derrick Henry, and then on the flip side, will this Titans D contain Jalen Hurts, who a lot of people are talking MVP candidate here. I know Patrick Mahomes is the favorite right now, but at least from a fantasy perspective, you can make an argument that Hurts is the fantasy MVP so far in 22.
One of the matchups that I'm really looking at is Miami at San Francisco. You've got an 8-3 team going into San Francisco, a team that's been on the rise, just got a lot of its players back within the past couple of weeks that were really injured before, and looking like they're about healthy, better than ever. They're playing well. And of course, Jimmy G is on a I guess a message sending season, perhaps.
Definitely. I mean, look at it this way. If the 49ers go back to square one in their initial plan for this season and they say, all right, we're here heading into 23. Trey Lance is our quarterback. He's recovered. He's young. And yeah, thanks for your service, Jimmy G. I mean, maybe if he wins a Super Bowl, they keep him. But I think at the very least, he's auditioning for his next job. There's already talk teams like the Jets, the Giants, for instance, may want a veteran quarterback before they can draft someone. I mean, in the case of the Jets, they thought they drafted one in Zach Wilson, but he looks to be a failure at this point. But
Mhm.
I got to agree with you. I'm really looking forward to that game. Garoppolo struggled at times during the year, but the 49ers keep winning. He does just enough to get that team the W's.
Absolutely. So that's going to be two great matchups there. Is there any others that stand out to you? I know that a lot of people are talking about Dallas, how well they're doing, with all the controversy there, unfortunately, with their owners still still finding ways, even if it's in the back decades, to find controversy on him. And that's still going on there. But Indianapolis with their new coach hopping in, trying to go ahead and resurrect this team. Do you see anything there, or is there any other matchups that you see that needs to be talked about before we head on out?
Yeah, Jeff Saturday comes from ESPN to the sidelines and doesn't know when to take time out. So,
No.
from a fantasy perspective, I think that's a good matchup. If you've got any Cowboys players, I think the only concern there would be if the Cowboys get a big enough lead and they coast in the second half, and Mike McCarthy has a common sense to pull his starters out. That might affect your points. But yeah, by all means, start Cowboys. There's another game. It doesn't have huge playoff implications. It does for one team that's fighting to stay alive in the AFC West, but Chargers Raiders always seems to be a great matchup, a close game, a lot of offensive firepower. Given the way Josh Jacobs ran last week, I think that bodes well for him trending forward. And then Justin Herbert, just phenomenal coming back to beat the Cardinals, and then the 2-point conversion to win the game, a gutsy call by Brandon Staley. I like the way he's playing, regardless of who his receivers are. I feel like he and Austin Eckler are putting up points week to week, and they did that last year against the Raiders in that epic Week 18 Sunday night last game of the season. And I kind of go out on a limb here. I say that should be a nice shootout for fantasy owners too.
The last game I want to touch on before we head to the break, or before we head to woof 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 the doghouse right after that, is the New York Jets. Jets, Jets. The comeback of the Jets. The comeback of New York football is there as far as both with the Giants and the Jets. The Jets, however, they are heading to Minnesota, and Minnesota, I am for a 9-2 team. It's usually should be more definitive on. Oh yes, they're a great team. They're Super Bowl bound, but as much as I have, enjoyment out of watching Minnesota, especially with players that I have on my fantasy football team, I'm not really sold on the Minnesota Vikings as a 9-2 team really going far in the playoffs just yet.
Completely agree with you, and I have to send shout outs to our cousins Mike and Brenda in Minnesota. Mike and I text every Sunday. In the good old days, I'd complain a lot about the Giants. I guess I can get back to that now with the
Well,
way
the
they're
good old days
playing.
was
But
last year, wasn't it?
yeah, I mean, there's been a what 6 good old days of Giants to complain, 6 years of Giants seasons to complain about. But no, with the Vikings, as a Cousins owner, he and I definitely have that in common. Our frustrations with him and the team at times, given that Justin Jefferson, if not the best, is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, and you just got to get that guy the ball. He's electric, like Tyreek Hill. But I agree with you. They kind of find ways to keep inferior teams in the game, not put them away, or even find ways to not win games that they should. And then they go and have that tremendous win at Buffalo a few weeks back, great comeback win. So they're very up and down. It's favorable that they play in the NFC North, but I don't think they'll get the 1 seed. But this is a game this week. I don't think it's too early to say. It's somewhat of a statement game. Opposite conference and all, I get it, but the Jets are an up and coming team fighting for a playoff berth. And if the Vikings are indeed a contender in the NFC, this is a team they should put away at home.
Absolutely, absolutely. Edward Zhang says you start one full PPR: Kamara, Swift, White, Robinson, Zeke, and Bam Knight.
Wow. You know, Normally I'd say Swift, but the whole Jamal Williams action has got me kind of nervous the past few weeks. Um, Even though there's Tony Pollard lurking, Gerald, I mean, Elliott looked good against the Giants.
Mhm.
And while he might be in a carrying share type of setup here, he seems to find the end zone. So of those, I might lean him. What do you think?
Well, either that. I mean, I will say that some of the Dallas receivers, because there's so many that are middling all right around the same type of numbers, you can pick up one of those. What Schultz or Gallup are on our, as far as in our league, they're available, but
Hmm.
they haven't proved to be consistent at all. I know Schultz is coming off of a 2 touchdown game, but seriously, he still only catches 4 balls a game. So is he really that reliable? You're not sure. Albeit, you have players out there you can go ahead and switch to. But I think I agree with you. I think that when it comes down to it, yeah, I think what you said is probably going to go best on that.
Yeah, and it's funny to say that, but at this point in the season, especially with a lot of these running backs seem to be a revolving door.
Yeah,
Coaches don't seem to want to make one guy a definitive starter. You've got to take the points so you can get him, and I will say it does help Zeke in terms of his workload and just what I saw watching him against, albeit a depleted Giants defense. He looks like he's not running out of gas just yet.
absolutely. So I really think that that's probably the best way to go. There are still pickups there in the waiver wire that can get you what an average of close to maybe 10 points on average. What I'm seeing, which may be the difference in your league, but for the most part, I think that's probably the best way to go right now. Not take too many chances on a waiver wire pickup because they're usually there for a reason on the waiver wire. It's usually very hot and cold players right now, and you have to gamble on them even more.
Definitely. And I feel like with the trade deadline pass, nothing's going to slip by guys in free agency every Wednesday morning when you check your email or check your fantasy app. A few weeks back, I told Dom, I said, look, Garrett Wilson's out there again. Let's go grab him. And he said he didn't do anything. And I said, I'm trying to think a few weeks ahead. I'm thinking if the Jets continue to struggle, maybe Flacco or White become the quarterback. And luckily for once, I was right. Usually, Dom, I'll let Dom overrule me. He's got kind of the final say. He's more Jerry Jones to my Steven, as it were. But in that case, that's what you've got to do. You've got to think, all right, there's a guy out there,
Maybe not
maybe.
the best
All right,
analogy to
yeah.
use
Given
here right
given the
now.
news, how about Bob Kraft and his son? His name escapes me right now, but
Maybe still not the best.
all right. How
They all
about
both have controversy behind them.
yeah, how about John Mara and whatever his son's name is?
Okay, they
Anyway,
haven't been in the news lately, so yeah, that's pretty
yeah,
good. That's okay.
yeah.
That's
There's
good.
no news is good news these days. And
Yes.
hey, by the way, Gerald, I'm trying not to be too cynical, but remember not that long ago when Dan Snyder was out on his yacht and avoiding a congressional inquiry, and he leaked something to, I forget who it was, ESPN, that basically he had dirt on Jerry Jones. Am I too cynical, or do you think he leaked that 1957 picture of Jerry Jones in Arkansas to the Washington Post, or just a mere coincidence, right?
Just a mere coincidence, indeed. Yes. Yeah. Just happened to be good reporting, I think. Let's go ahead and chalk it down as that, unless we hear otherwise, of course.
Yeah, and they
Hmm.
are two great reporters. Sally Jenkins definitely is well known, but yeah, just a
Seems
coincidence.
very peculiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, but yeah, I digress. But anyway, yeah. So in that case, you've got to kind of think forward. Like you've got a receiver, a running back that's not producing. If you've got, especially in the world of having an IR slot available, if you're someone you can stash who's a disappointment 1 week, you never know. In a couple weeks, they may be the starter again. They may have a favorable matchup against the Rams of the world.
Once again, it's Inside Sports Fantasy Football. If you have any questions for us at any point in time, isfantasyfootball at yahoo.com or Inside Sports FF on Twitter. But it's that magical time. We've already talked about the games we're looking at for this weekend. We're already talked to you about what kind of things you need to look out for when it comes to your fantasy football team just before the fantasy football playoffs begin. But I'm out on the lawn. Still, even though it's the weather's a little colder, the air is crisp. It's still pretty good out there. As I head out on the lawn, I check over and I see woof woof woof. It's all there. It's all set. It's all ready. It's the doghouse.
Indeed, I hope that doghouse has the Christmas decorations and/or
It
lights up.
does a
But
little small tiny wreath on it.
good to see. Yeah, we've got a dachshund lit up on our front porch for the Christmas holidays. So, given that, I'll say our doghouse pick of the week with the Christmas lights lit up and wreath on the front door. Looking through, Vegas has gotten even more efficient with these lines. There are some where it's, for instance, the Bengals are getting two at home against KC. At that point in time, it's essentially a pick 'em game. Some 1 point lines. Vegas will never give you a pick 'em though. I mean, they'll have a half-point spread before you see a pick anymore. But a couple games stood out to me. The top of the list is the one we talked about earlier. The Dolphins heading into Santa Clara to face the 49ers in one of the best matchups of this week. Dolphins are getting 4 points. I say take the Fins. I mean, I think they can keep this game close. They got a ton of offensive firepower. While I respect the 49ers defense, I do not think they're invincible. I think they can be lit up. And if there's a team that'll do it, I think it's Tua and company in Miami. Add to that Mike McDaniel making his return to where he was worked under Kyle Shanahan for a number of years, had great success. He's got some former 49ers running backs at his disposal. So I don't want to say it's a grudge match, but it'll be a teacher and student type matchup. I think it'll be a great game. I think if the Dolphins do lose, they can keep it within a field goal. Everyone's happy. You got that extra point cushion in Vegas and you can cash in your check. So Miami Dolphins are the pick this week.
There you go, indeed. But if you have any questions for Chris or me or anything relating to fantasy football, go ahead and check us out, isfantasyfootball at yahoo.com or Inside Sports FF on Twitter. And please, if you can, which I know you can, if because since you're listening to this podcast, you can go ahead and check out the awesome Dom-ination Sports Nation when a new podcast appears. Check out their entire library of episodes they have at the Dom-ination Sports Nation today. Chris, it's been great having you aboard on again. Just trying to get you whenever you can, man. I know you're a busy guy, but any last thoughts before we head on out?
Yeah, thanks for your patience, Gerald. Long story short, the flu that's been going around, not COVID, affected this house. And to make a long story short, I was the last man standing. So just glad to be here, not coughing or sick or anything. So thank you and our loyal listeners for your patience. But like I said, now we've beaten this drum all year and in previous years on this great show. Watch the games, pay attention to who does what. Even if a guy only gets a a few touches per game, or maybe a wide receiver's becoming more of a favorite target with a particular quarterback. And two, like play those defensive matchups week to week, stream defenses. You can get into the playoffs with a 500 record sometimes. And then, as we saw in the World Cup, there are those odd tiebreakers, the old points differential. In the case of most fantasy football leagues, you want to have the most points. That will get you in over a team that you're tied with record wise, whether it's 7-7, 8-8, depending on when your playoffs start. And then two, you got to have a quality kicker. I mean, as we head into December, not only in the world of fantasy football, but in real life NFL, teams might start to get more apt to kick field goals as they want a playoff berth. Maybe they get a little more conservative and not go for it on fourth down as much as the Brandon Staley's of the worlds do. So the weather will also change. So, I mean, I think kicking is going to become even more important. And like you mentioned, those extra 5-10 points make a difference and, can essentially help you win money versus being shut out of your playoffs.
That to me is one of the main reasons why prioritizing in the later rounds a really top of the line and accurate kicker to me means the world than just trying to stream. I if I had to prioritize between that and a defense, I prioritize the kicker every time.
Completely agree. I mean, we have Butker in both leagues. We drafted him, and we're happy to have him. Whereas with a defense, complete revolving door, just play whoever. I would even argue sometimes at quarterback, as you reach the latter stages of the season, or even in the playoffs, your quarterback gets hurt, or maybe there's somewhere on waivers. I mean, we got Geno Smith on waivers midway through the year. Who would have thought? And he's not the most compelling or high points scoring quarterback in fantasy football, but a guy will get you about 20 points week to week, and I'll take that every day considering we're deep at other positions.
Absolutely indeed. But if you have any questions for us, isfantasyfootball at yahoo.com or Inside Sports FF on Twitter. Chris has been Chris has been great having you back on the show. Looking forward to our next conversation. The fantasy football playoffs in some leagues start next week. Looking forward to talking about playoff strategy. That I'm really looking forward to, plus the latest news in the NFL. And of course, another trip to the doghouse is in store for us next week, right here at Inside Sports Fantasy Football.